Hello, welcome to Miss Hepke's podcast. Today we have special guest Ryan Hammerly.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Today we're going to be talking about a quote from Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's a quote that debates nature versus nurture. So I'm just going to read the quote now. Listen, Sam, if it was nature, nobody wouldn't have to look out for babies touching stoves, would they? 'Cause they just naturally wouldn't touch it, but they sure will, so it's caution. Nah, it ain't. It's nature. 'Cause nature makes caution. It's the strongest thing that God ever made. Now, fact is, it's the onlyest thing God ever made. Now, he made nature, and nature made everything else. So here, I think, when he's talking about caution, I think what he is saying is caution is like a sense of nurture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I agree with the second guy. The last thing he said was he made nature and nature made everything else. I think I kind of lean towards that side too, because the first people, sure you learn things, but what about the first person to ever be made? How did they learn things? It must have been just put in them as like a natural instinct. So, sure, I guess if we talk about hunting and finding food to survive, you learn the best ways to hunt and to catch animals to eat or grow crops from people, the people that have been through it, and the people that learn the best way to do it, and they pass that information on to you, and you pass that information on to someone else.
Mm-hmm. So, but the passing on of behaviors would be nurture. So there's two schools of thought. So nature would be it's instinctually in you, right? Like you were saying, like you just know how to do things. You know that when you're hungry, you go and you eat. But nurture is the belief that every behavior that you ever do is ingrained in you by learning it from either observing other people or them teaching you it. So we talk about animals hunting. A lot of animals, like a lion, teaches its cub how to hunt. They start off like kind of like scaffolding, even little by little.
But I wonder how that lion learned.
Right.
They learned from their
Mm-hmm.
parent, but where did their parent learn from?
Right.
So it's like, I guess I just mean that in who was the first one to learn it, and how did they learn it, because they didn't have anyone before them. But
it's like which comes first, the chicken or the
right,
egg.
that's exactly what I was thinking. But it's true, you do learn most things. You don't just you aren't born knowing that you shouldn't touch a hot stove. You learn that from either touching a hot stove and getting burned and not wanting to do it again, or someone tells you not to do it, but then you're still curious sometimes anyway, and you might get a little too close to it.
Right. Like I wonder, when fire first came out, like if people knew way back when, if people knew not to touch it or they had to learn it,
they're probably like, wow, this is really hot. I should probably stay away.
Not touch it. But this is actually like a huge debate. So this book came out in the 1940s, and people were talking about it then, and I'm sure they were talking about it way before that also. But they actually do like a whole bunch of studies. So there's studies like with twins, so adoptive twins in psychology. Sometimes they'll find identical twins, right, that went to different families, and then they'll call them in and observe them and ask them all these questions to see if there is a difference, growing up in a different family, if you are a different if your behaviors are different, essentially. And it's kind of weird, I saw something the other day, and it was essentially stories about different twins that ended up finding each other through coworkers, actually. They're like, oh, I didn't know you worked at this bakery, when really the other twin worked somewhere else. And a lot of times they were saying that the twins had the same mannerisms and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, even if you are a twin and you grow up in the same household, you're gonna be different than your other twin. It's natural, and I think that brings up a whole nother topic, is like DNA, and like what's ingrained in your DNA. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, everyone's different, so it's like even if you are put through the same things, you still turn out different than another person because you're just naturally different.
Yeah, but if you think about it, like, if you have siblings, like, I wonder if you put a sibling, you and your sibling have the same, like, scenario and have to make choices. I wonder if you guys would make the same choices based on how your family was run, you know?
I think, just like in a nutshell, we all have basic instincts, but we do learn most of everything we like need to do to survive,
Mm-hmm.
or just to do anything. We learn, I would say, most of it, but it just brings me back to the whole, which came first.
The chicken or the egg. But
Yeah.
you essentially think that, like, if there was no one there to teach you, we'd be able to figure it out.
Yeah, I guess you just learn it because you have
Yeah.
to survive.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both,
Oh.
But
It's like the kid, gosh, what did they call the kid? You know, the stories about there was like a boy way back when, and he lived with wolves. It's a true story, and it's like he learned all his behaviors mimic the wolves because that's what he grew up with. And then a man came and like took him and tried to like teach him behaviors of human beings, and I mean he never really made it very far, but there's a certain term for that. I think it's called like the wild child or something like that. But it's interesting what influences us.
is that more of a
That
kind
would
of
be
like
like a
we're bringing
nurture.
a lot of sayings into this,
I
but
know.
we can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's like when you're growing up and you learn all these things and how to live a certain way, it's tough to change all of that.
Yeah, change your waves. It's like repetitive behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they do say that, well, obviously, your childhood
Mhm.
and your teenage years, those are the most important years for developing like who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, they're called the feral children, I think.
okay.
Sorry, I got distracted. But no, because it's like there was a 12-year-old girl that was like locked in a room on like a toilet for like 12 years. Yeah.
That's not
And
good.
I know. And they weren't able to teach her, I learned this in my linguistics class, they weren't able to teach her like a lot of oral language skills because after you hit puberty, if you haven't influenced any of that, then you don't develop those skills. But that's got nothing to do with this. So
Well, let's wrap it up right now. So, in the quote, they're kind of going back and forth, talking about nature and nurture, and the one guy says, they just, um, I don't know.
okay, so
Yeah.
yeah.
You take it.
So for the child, like you could say that talking is instinctual, right? It's something that we
Or communicating.
sound comes out of our communicating.
Just communicating.
And
yeah.
that's another thing
You learn how
because
to talk.
yeah, you learn how to talk. But there's certain cultures around the world that like the number our fingers, like number 1 means the same thing. Number 2, and a smile is universal. It's like we don't learn how to smile. We just naturally smile, and that's across all cultures.
Mm-hmm. I think
So-
it's funny when you say naturally, so then it's like nature wins right there.
Right. So basically, I think that it's a little bit of everything.
It is.
Yeah, and I think we should just end there. Thank you for joining with us today in our podcast. We appreciate it. Have a very nice evening.